All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Cincinnati Public Schools engagement session around the budget for FY26. And joining me this morning is the amazing Superintendent Shauna Murphy and Assistant Superintendent Mike Guston, who has had the wonderful privilege, we have the wonderful privilege of becoming our next treasurer. Good morning, everyone. How's everyone this morning?
Good morning.
Good
How are
morning,
you
Rob.
today?
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, we're going to kick it off. Superintendent, I think we're starting with you this morning.
Well, I appreciate that, Rob. Thank you so much. And good morning to everyone. As we begin this session, we're asking all of our viewers and listeners, if you are participating via Facebook and you have questions or comments, please type those questions and comments in the chat session. If you are on Zoom, please click the hand icon to ask your question in person, or you can also leave a question in the chat, and we'll be sure to share your questions throughout the session this morning. In addition to that, the board has created an opinion poll on some of the huge initiatives we're looking at starting as a part of our growth plan for phase 2 and phase 3. We want to know your thoughts. We want to get your opinions. And so if you can click on this QR code, if you can click on this QR code and share your opinions with us, that will be greatly appreciated.
All right. Thank you, Superintendent. Mike, I think it's on to you, my friend.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Rob. Happy to be here this morning with everyone, and we do want to get to your questions pretty soon. But first, we want to do a couple slides just to set the stage for where we are at with this year's general fund budget. So if you go to the next slide, Rob. So based on our 5-year forecast, which we do twice a year in November and May, we're anticipating revenue of $624.6 million next year. So that's how much money we're going to have coming in. Hoping to put away $1 million of that to improve our cash reserves. That gives us a available amount of budget of $623.6 million to allocate for all the functions of the school district. And so what you see below there on the slide are what we call obligated cost. It's a little under 10% of what we have available. And these are things that we used to call fixed cost. They're also fixed and variable. For example, like the debt transfer, we have to move money over to pay for the bonds and the debt that we've on the buildings we have. There's a Fund 34 transfer that provides some maintenance money for facilities that's required. The county auditor charges us for collecting property taxes. We have insurance, we have tuition, we have some other things in there. You can see utilities, the payment to United Way for preschool promise, those sort of things. All those together is a little over 61 million. And so then again, that's like I said, around right under 10%. That gives us about $562 million for everything else. If you go to the next slide, Rob. This is a high level of everything else. Obviously one of the biggest spots we spend money is in salaries and benefits. That's roughly 70% of what we do. We also have a lot of services, whether that's curriculum, transporting our kids, professional services, software. Your supplies are in there, classroom supplies, custodial supplies, computers, that sort of. We also have equipment, technology, furniture, things for career tech, and their vehicles, those sort of things, and then kind of a little bit of everything. So to give people an idea of where we're at, when we take all the salaries for this year, so we take all the schools as we plan to staff them, as well as all the central office staff salaries. That's about $476 million that would spend on those, and that gives us about 86 million for everything that's not salaries. So all the items other than personnel on this sheet, we're looking at about $86 million to allocate across those. So that is why we are looking for ideas, for your ideas about our budget and where we should go with that. So Rob, I think that's the last prepared slide if you want to take us to questions, sir.
Absolutely. Good morning. That is our last prepared slide. We may slide over to the bucket slide here in a little bit. Um, go. And let's start this morning with this process is an all-year process of building the budget, right? And it starts with kind of that first concept right after the last budget is approved, it seems, and it starts in the finance committee. Mike, can you share a little bit about the steps of the process as they go through, where some of the decision making happens and begins, and where we are now in the budget making process?
Sure, sure. And you're absolutely right. It is it is a year-round thing. As soon as one budget's approved, we start the next. So a couple of key things that have happened already. So about October, we look at this year's enrollment and try to project next year's enrollment. So that always happens. Also in the winter, I've mentioned the 5-year forecast. We do that in November. That helps to set our revenue target for next year. There's always a board workshop, in the winter there where we spend a day with the board talking about their priorities, what they want to see us accomplish. All those things kind of come together, in December. So we start doing kind of a high level pass of the budget and we start looking at school staffing, obviously this year with the growth plan. That was a bit of a more involved process as we tried to figure out how to staff the new growth schools and the changes we were doing there. So that was cool. We are at the point where the schools have their budgets and they've allocated their budgets, and we're getting ready to really dig into the central office budget. And we will continue to work through the budget through the spring. We have to have a budget approved, by July 1st so that we can continue running the district. That is our hard deadline. It's really like July 23rd, I think, is our last board meeting, or June 23rd. June 23rd is our last board meeting of the fiscal year. So that's our target, to have everything in place and ready to go.
Thank you so much, Mike, for sharing that. Before we continue, I just want to share how to participate today. If you're on Facebook, you can go ahead and leave your question in the chat, and we will share it with these wonderful individuals and school leaders. And if you're on Zoom, you can click the hand icon and or ask a question, and we'll either invite you over or we'll ask your question as well. And we greatly appreciate your participation today. Superintendent Mike mentioned a little bit about the growth plan and how it's become part of this budget building process. Can you talk a little bit about how the reasons for the growth plan around budget and what some of our hopes for the growth plan were as we work into this new era and this new design of CPS?
Happy to do so. So last spring and summer, when we began this work as the interim superintendent at the time, the team and I got together immediately because we had about a $32 million gap in our budget that we needed to close. And so while we were going through every school budget and every department budget, it brought to mind for me the work of the board's ad hoc subcommittee and the recommendations that had been made there. And I started to scour through those and thought, this is the best time to begin to try to implement some of the ideas that were shared, because we believe that would create a cost savings for us. So we began to do that. And one of the first steps was to create a corridor model in our school district. And so we are in a central or a district-wide corridor. We have an east corridor and a west corridor. And in doing that work, what we also took a look at is our building utilization. We have some high schools that were highly overutilized or crowded, and we had elementary buildings that were underutilized. And so what we wanted to do was create a balance. A third piece of the ad hoc committee was to create middle schools. We had been in K-8 buildings for quite some time. Several years ago, the district made the determination we would move to most of our high schools being 7 to 12. And we really wanted to take a look at how do we better meet the social emotional needs of that middle-aged student so that we could have even better student outcomes for them. And so we have created junior highs and middle schools. For this current school year, 24-25, we created our first junior high, Schroeder. It is going really well in terms of the number of students in relation to the building that we have, in terms of what is happening with discipline, and we're looking forward to the academic outcomes as it relates to our state report card. And so we've added 5 more schools for the upcoming school year. And we know that this growth plan implementation of even just those pieces will save us money coming into the fiscal year 26 budget.
So both a consideration of optimizing our schools and saving money in the long term for the district as well and improving our efficiencies. So thank you so much, Superintendent. Mike, I'm going to kick it back to you for a minute. I want to ask you a question about revenue and how the district gets revenue. And then on top of that, we're going to add a question about what kind of revenue we get as we go into the next few days. We see changes to the federal Department of Education, what kind of funding we get from them. So we'll start with the local funding, what kind of funding we get, and then talk a little about the kind of funding we get from the federal side as well, and explain that a little bit. Will you, Mike?
Sure. Good question. So the budget we're talking about today is our general fund, which is does not include state and federal money, but this is our, you said, local revenue. So there's really three buckets of money that we talk about in this group. One of them is local property taxes. That is our biggest chunk. That is our biggest chunk of money that we bring in. Those are property taxes from the taxpayers in our district. And then the second part is the state share. So state share is is a smaller share. That is what we get from the state. So state funds all schools based on your enrollment and what they think your cost is to educate students. So that's pretty much your general fund. The other pieces that come in there's some other stuff. A lot of those are payments in lieu of taxes. So either the TIF districts that are around the city, or the commercial community reinvestment act parcels where they pay us. So I did some analysis a while ago. Basically 70% of all the money we come in is directly based on our local property taxes. The other 30 is other stuff, and most of that is state aid. So we have a couple things going on there. The biggest one is, state is going in through their biennial budget process right now. So they're working to build a budget for the next 2 years. Part of that is how the state funds schools. We might ask Superintendent to talk about that a little bit. I know she was at the state address yesterday, so she might have some breaking news there, for sure. But that part is as far as the federal stuff. And we don't really have a ton of information now. I'm sure everyone saw the news that the Department of Education is reducing jobs. Obviously, we don't know if that means they're reducing funding or how that's going to work out. We'll say, we're going to spend probably about $64 million in federal aid this year for our school district. A lot of that's Title I money. Title I is for students who are economically disadvantaged, but there's a lot of other federal programs in there too. There's Head Start for some of our preschoolers. There's a grant called Carl Perkins that provides direct support for our career tech programs. The other big one that people really need to be concerned about is the IDEA B money. That is money directly to benefit students with disabilities. And so those are all important federal programs, and we're just waiting to see, how the funding for those shakes out.
Mike, thank you for that. I think an interesting point you made earlier is that 70% of our major general fund is supported by the people watching and the people who are going to interact with these videos are local supporters. And that's interesting. Then the other comes from the state funding, things of that nature. So thank you again for sharing that. If the Department of Education were to pull money from the federal and they were to pull money from these title funds, what would then happen from our side, from a budget perspective? What would we have to do?
It's an interesting thing. So like Title One is supposed to be supplemental, so it's not your core things. But what Title One really does is help level the playing field, and help take students who don't have the same resources at home and provide them resources. So we would feel that really sharply. That's a lot of our reading and math specialists, who are working with kids every day on the reading and math skills. That would hurt us. A bigger cut, I think, would be the IDEA B money. So the student disabilities money. We would have to pick up that. And those aren't services you can cut. So if we don't get federal money, we'll have to pull local money in to pay for those. Obviously the state would have the option to help to, increase their support for us, but not sure that that's going to be the way they would choose to go either.
And then, Rob, in addition to those things that Mike mentioned, we're also keeping our eye on what's happening in the agriculture department as we are concerned about free and reduced lunch opportunities, lunch and breakfast, actually, for our young people. And you're right, yesterday I did get to see the governor's State of the State address live as Representative Denson did invite me and Dr. Moffitt, our board president. And I really gleaned from that probably about 5 different categories that the governor is focused on. So in addition to some areas in education, he's also emphasizing like workforce, child care, youth, dental and vision, as well as higher education. And so I am concerned that with the proposed budget, that Cincinnati could stand to lose millions of dollars, which would then impact, as Mike said, would impact our budget. We would have to figure out what we would do, and could lead to some possible cuts in our budget.
Thank you, Superintendent. Superintendent, can you dig into the agricultural piece? It's one of the things that we talk a lot about here and we celebrate is our full school program where we buy local from local farmers and local communities, and we support them with that money that we get from the federal government for food. Do you see or feel, or have you heard anything from the federal government that may affect that?
I don't know about the farm to table element. I am greatly, however, concerned about our ability to continue to offer our families free and or reduced lunch. If those dollars are taken away, I am not sure what we would do to be able to supplement young people having 2 solid meals during the school day.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. And I know that's a challenge for us to talk about, and we really don't know. But of course, we're planning as you can, as best you can. So thank you very much for sharing that. All right. Talk a little bit about one of our biggest buckets is staff. Why is Cincinnati Public Schools so heavy on staffing?
I think the personnel budget in most organizations has the heaviest weight. We do have some contractual obligations. Earlier, Mike mentioned students with disabilities and where they have individualized education plans. The fact that we do have to meet the needs of each and every individual child. And so it's not cookie cutter in public education. And we want to serve and meet the needs of all of the children who come through our schoolhouse doors. We believe in giving everyone what they need to be successful. And we've actually taken great pride in being able to do that. And our board has driven us to be able to do that through the policies that they've created. A couple of examples I can share is I think we're very proud of where we are with funding of school social workers and the level of return on investment that we get from the work that they do. I'd like to say the same thing about our school counselors. I've shared before that I have worked in a high school as a principal, and I had a school social worker for a period of time, one day out of the week. And the board said that is not reasonable and it's not enough support for our young people. And so every schoolhouse in our district has full-time social worker. Every school, high school in our district in K-8 building has counseling services. And so we're really proud of that. And we would love to be able to keep those levels where they are. A reduction in revenue could possibly make us move in a different direction.
Yeah, if I could just add, I mean, we are a person business, education is a person to person business, and I appreciate superintendent, it's not just the teachers in the classroom. It's the other services that we wrap around the students to make them successful. It's also the work of running 65 buildings, that have to be, clean, they have to be maintained. They have to be, all the things that go along with those has to happen. And we are actually less personnel, dependent than a lot of school districts just because of some choices we've made of what services we contract versus what services we bring in-house.
It's funny as we talk about this. We right down the hall, I have a gentleman fixing a door. And sometimes we don't think about that with our school budgets. That we have to fix doors, we have to fix windows, we have to paint, we have to repair. That the schoolhouse doesn't kind of just hold on its own, right? So thank you for sharing that about personnel and why we're so heavy as a school district. All right, state minimums. So let's talk a little bit about state minimums and what they are. There's been three kind of suggestions in the last board meeting. So this has come up. So if a school is running at its state minimum, what does that look like?
That is a great question, Rob. And something something that we continue to work backwards from. Because the state, I'll let Superintendent Murphy talk about a schoolhouse. Like we tried to do it for just the treasurer's office. Like Treasurer Wagner and I went through and said, "What's the real state minimum?" Well, state minimum is you have a treasurer, and that would be it. That is one employee who would do all the financial work of the district, which just isn't that's not even realistic. I don't know that any school district has only one person in the treasurer's office. So then we said, well, what do you have to do? Well, you need a person to do payroll and a person to do the AP check run, the vendor checks. Okay, now you're at three people. Okay, you need a person to do the budget. Now you're at four. But I mean, those numbers are the technical state minimums, but they're not really usable state minimums.
Superintendent, what about the schoolhouse? What would that look like as an example to give people at home? Like we were talking about social workers, for example. So is a social worker a state minimum?
Well, there are no state minimums on, excuse me, school social workers. There are no state minimums on school social workers. That is not a part of it. However, there are other things that we do. Pardon me, I'm so sorry. In our school district, that even there are some recent things that we've taken on that we provide as services to young people that we do to make sure that they get to and from school safely, and that we've had to add to our budget recently because we think that's best. And so we would need to probably take a look at some of those things across the board. Everything that is done to impact the schoolhouse for greater student outcomes. So whether we're taking care of something from a whole child lens, or we're taking care of something that is required, such as materials for curriculum, all of those pieces would have to be considered.
I will say one other thing while you put the QR code back up for the survey. So if anyone's out there, please, and hasn't done so already, please go ahead and do the survey. But one of the holes or one of the concerns in the state funding formula is it doesn't really account for districts that have multiple buildings. And I think that's one of the things. So when the state looks at like state funding formula looks at how many teachers we should have based on number of students, it would make sense if we had one giant school. Right, right. If you had one giant school, you could perfectly allocate classes at the class size. That's not realistic or best practice or anything. And so you have to think about, as we have schools in all these neighborhoods, and as we've put, schools close to where people live, you're not going to get these perfect breakdowns where you have perfectly filled classes in every single neighborhood. It's not a thing that happens in the real world.
Thank you so much, Mike. And I think you started with it's just not realistic, right? It would mean less transportation, activities after school aren't state minimum, things that we realistically could not just peel away for the state minimum. So
Yeah,
and
I
that they
mean,
were unrealistic.
I mean,
So
most districts in the state, are small and rural just by number, right? There's 613 districts, I think. And a lot of those districts have one elementary school, one high school, and some may have a middle school in there. And that is a much different staffing management environment than us, where we have 60 plus buildings, across 91 square miles.
thank you. And lastly, let's talk a little bit about compliance because we talked about state minimums, but then we also talked about what it takes to be compliant for state money, for federal money, for even accountability, just accountability to our local taxpayers who pay 70% in the general fund, right? We also have accountability to them to share how we're spending our money and what that looks like. So, talk a little about how compliance works and why it's important for us to be able to prove our compliance.
One particular area, Rob, is we mentioned earlier our students with disabilities. So by law, there are certain things that we have to do to make sure those young people are progressing, make sure those young people are growing. And so school teams get together, they create IEPs, including the student, including the parent, and some of that decision making. And then we're obligated to make sure we meet the needs of that child what's based on what's written in that IEP.
Yeah, I would to add on to that, Rob, I would say we are highly regulated and highly audited. Yeah, we go through several audits every year, and it seems like every year we get a few new ones. Yeah, but our spending is scrutinized, our outcomes are scrutinized. The use of state and federal grants is scrutinized to make sure that we're meeting the purpose of the grants. I would say that there is a lot of reporting out there, so I think it's really important. Like we just had a meeting last night where we got a lot of really good updates on reading and algebra scores. And so that data is out there. It's being shared, with the public on a very regular basis.
So for
Thank
example, another example that people may not necessarily think about, now, although our board has had a policy around cell phones for quite some time, this past May, the governor put in place for the state of Ohio broadly that all schools had to ban cell phones during the school day. So in the summer, just last summer, we made a pretty large purchase of Yonder pouches in order to support being able to keep cell phones put away during the school day. That was a mandate from the state, not purchasing the Yonder pouches, but ensuring that cell phones were banned from schools. I don't think that broadly people always know or recognize that, and they think some of the decisions that we decisions, and there are things that are driven from the state. Another example of that on the instructional side is the science of reading. We have to upfront dollars in order to implement this mandate from the state. And so that you may have seen that on the slide previously, where Mike talked about all of the dollars that we have to go ahead and set aside, so to speak.
Thank you so much. We are actually right at time. I do want to share, we did have two comments in Facebook. These aren't particularly towards uh, the topic, but I do want to address them. Tracy Long said, "Good morning. I hope all the employees stop playing with my kids. And yes, make sure that they get the right degree at Cincinnati Public Schools." And I want to say that we will go ahead and reach out to Tracy, send her a message so she can contact customer care and follow up with her to make sure she's okay and her young one's okay. So thank you, Tracy, for commenting. And we will reach out to you offline to make sure that you get assistance you need. Superintendent, Treasurer Mike, thank you so much for joining us today. And everyone else, thanks for joining us for breakfast. That's a fun new engagement. Anything you want to leave us with today?
Thank you to Rob for facilitating the conversation. I could not do this without you. Appreciate comment and feedback to us. Just one last opportunity to check out our QR code and give us your opinion.
So this is Treasurer Mike.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob, for facilitating these as always. As Superintendent said, please fill out the survey. We do take those responses very seriously, and have a great day.
All right, everyone. Thank you. Have a wonderful day. And our wonderful team here is going to go off and try to do the best we can to make futures bright for students. So have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.